Okay, so here's your graph. Here's the graph that you use Saturn to any of the other planets. Okay, this is Saturn to the other planets. And on the below it, you'd put the degree and minute of the Saturn natal position, and the other planet, if that's the sun, you put the sun's natal position. That's the moon, you put the moon's natal position. The first one on the left is always a Saturn natal position. So it starts from there. Okay, then same graph, but when we're gonna, so I'd like you to make sure you calculate Saturn to Saturn for next week, but if you got a chance, the following week, we're gonna be Saturn to the sun and Saturn to the moon. And then we're going to do Mercury and Venus and Mars and Jupiter. So we're going to go through these two a session, and it's worth getting ahead of them, getting them done if you can. But where's the moon? Let me just get it. Okay, so here's my chart. Here's the moon. My moon's at 1949 Cancer. There's a square, 1949 Libra. The opposition, 1949 Capricorn, and this waning square, 1949 Aries. There's my Saturn at 7 degrees Leo. So Saturn is going to move forward. Saturn just passed before I was born, conjuncted the moon, but would have passed it. So it's not going. It's going to be 28, 29 years before Saturn actually comes around. It's going to move around all this time before it starts having a conscious relationship to my moon. And that cycle starts at around 27. That's when I got to start getting my life together. If there's other reasons, you might have to try and get it together earlier. But for me, some people might have had, if I had my moon in Virgo at 2.5 years, I'd be 2.5 years later, I'd be starting Saturn would conjunct the moon. Somebody might get it if Saturn's opposed your moon, or be 14 years before Saturn conjuncts the moon. So when we're born, we're dealing with the end of that moon cycle. The habits are not so much in our control. Things are happening to us until we look right. Saturn looks right at the face of the moon. Then it begins. So from 28 to 58 and 57, that Saturn cycle of the moon. That's the one where I'm having to try and get my lifestyle together and be more in control of it. So so it starts at different points. So if it's starting at different points, the graphic is going to start like the first aspect that gets made. Like, okay, let's just go. I think I have the graphics for this. So the first aspect that gets made from Saturn to the moon, Saturn move along in about 6 years, it'll come up to this point. When I find out the date or the 3 dates that goes in it, it's going to start on this is the waxing square. I'm going to be putting in the dates on the waxing square first. It's not going to start at the conjunction. The first aspect Saturn makes is going to be that square, the waxing square to the moon. The next aspect, it goes up, and we watch the next square to the opposition. It goes to the opposition, so then we start, but the starting point is not at the conjunction. You start here. It'll make one of these aspects first. It doesn't always start at the first one. So in doing this, if you're starting, well, whatever aspect you're starting at, it'll be one of these. It'll be the conjunction first, square, opposition, or square. It'll be one of these once you start first, and then your graph just starts from there. And you might have to use a second copy of this to go on into your 80s and 90s to be able to carry on with this. Okay, now, so then you do another next square to the next one, and then at the, oops, sorry. So by the time Saturn's moved all the way around, it's got a square, an opposition, a square. It finally comes back to conjunct the moon. It squares the moon, opposes the moon, squares the moon, finally comes back and conjuncts the moon. Well, I can certainly say that my lifestyle was significantly affected by circumstances in the family and outside the family, around where I was living, and that very distinctly. But I really wasn't, I thought I was in control of it. Really, I didn't start to get my bearings on how I'm supposed to live till 28. By 21, I had already become a vegetarian, left home. It just, you have all the moon things. So when we switched Saturn to Saturn, we're going to look at responsibility, discipline, commitment. When we look at Saturn to the moon, we're looking at responsibility, discipline, commitment around home, around life, around relationship to how we're feeling. And everything about the moon, every category in each sign, every category in each house, and each of the aspects to it are all going to be triggered off anytime Saturn makes an aspect to that moon. You're going to have to look at it. Okay, so there's always going to be a kind of serious, first the depression, and then a realization, then the work and the effort gets made, and then the aspect lifts, and you've made the adjustment. But the main thing in doing the graph, it just doesn't, it starts at whatever aspect. So there's a big difference between the waxing square and the waning square. So you have the conjunction, the waxing square, the opposition, the waning square, the conjunction. So you just have to make sure you're on the right aspect. You know, you're in the right place on the graph. Once you got the graph down, you got the dates, and you make the dates so they're close to the graph, and there's room on the side of it for the events. Okay, these are made so you can print them out so they would fit nicely on an 8.5 by 11 page. You know, and you can get them on a page where there's lots of room to work on it, or 8 by 10, whatever, if you're in Europe, but it'll still fit nicely on a standard office page, or photocopy page, or printer page. So then when you get to the next one, after the conjunction with the Saturn to the moon, you wouldn't be looking when it hits Saturn. That Saturn return is another thing. It's another cycle. You'd be looking to see when it comes back to square the next time, when it opposes a second time. Once it passes the Saturn, it's starting over again. You've been through all this territory before. So it's not till you get 29 that you're repeating cycles and you're starting to have a familiar basis. I've seen this before. I've been at this before. This is familiar, so you're a little bit more equipped to deal with the later aspects. But this was just a little tricky one. And then if you had to do the sun, like, okay, I think I have the sun on these ones. Yeah, so if I want to calculate the sun, there's my sun at 2318 of Libra, 2318 Capricorn, the opposition, 2318 Aquarius, square, waning square, 2318 of Cancer. So I've marked in the 4 points I have to calculate. So I want, when Saturn's doing its cycle, I don't want to watch the ones where it's hitting itself. When it comes to Saturn to my sun, I'm going to watch the ones where it's hitting the sun. It's another sequence, another cycle going on at the same time as the others, but with a different interpretation. So there's here's my Saturn, or red line. You see where the squares, you see where the planets are. So Saturn starts here. It's going to hit the conjunction to my sun first. So it's not going to be quite 7 years. It'll be 6 years, probably 5, 6 years when Saturn conjuncts my sun. Well, that's a very different thing than conjuncting the moon, and a very different thing than Saturn conjuncting Saturn. So it's important to see each of these stories, Saturn to Saturn by itself, and to understand the continuity. You know, astrology can be summed up to the laws of continuity and correspondence. What corresponds and how things move in a cycle. Then there's mystical things that are laws of silence and laws that go beyond the duality, that reaches beyond this, inner mysteries. But once you get on it, you're just looking at you got the degree. It's going to be, if it's in a cardinal sign, it's going to be the same degree of all the cardinal signs. If it's fixed signs, it's going to be all fixed signs and all mutable signs. So you're just seeing it. And we're separating them out, going to look at one at a time. So we're not looking at them all at once and have them all interweaving, always jumping to this, always jumping to that, because you lose the meaning of this is coming from here, it's going to there. You lose the phasal understanding of each planet, of each relationship. You know, and it's a different relationship with your mother or your father, you know, like, or your sister or your brother. Each one's a different relationship with its own different timing, all happening at the same time. Okay, so we've simplified down, look, 4 aspects. We've narrowed it down to 1 degree instead of 7, 8 degrees. We've narrowed it down to smaller time frames. And we're looking to see when they occurred in a lifetime. And we're not looking at all that. We're looking at one at a time. to make sense of it, to see this clearly. And even when I see an advanced chart, I think like that. I look at a chart, and when I'm looking at what's Saturn doing in a chart, I look at it moving around, see it to itself, see it to the sun, see it to the moon. I see each, and when I see it hitting one, I look back and I think, when did it hit the other times? As soon as you get the times, it becomes valid to go into this extended history, into one's history, one's biography, one's biology, one's complexes, and one's evolution. You begin to see the challenges that and the efforts needed to evolve from where you started from. No matter what, whether you have good experiences or terrible experiences, you're still going to gain experiences. And your soul is going to evolve from that gain, whether they're good or bad. This is just the weather forecast of how to go on and try how to work and align yourself with these cycles. So then you get the second cycle of Saturn to the sun, third cycle, second. So I hit the conjunction first. So my graph would be starting right at the beginning. But you'll notice if you look at this graph, it's geared. It doesn't start just at the conjunction. It starts a bit before. So if the conjunction is the first aspect, you can start with it. So for my Saturn to the sun, it would be the first. It would start that. Although I would be about 6 years old. And then it would be 7-year intervals from there. If it was after, it would be, I would start at whichever one was the first aspect that Saturn made to that planet. First of the conjunction squares or oppositions. It's simple. We're just looking at I mean, the lines on a sheet of paper, the lines on an ephemeris. Just look at it. Oh, geez, what a bunch of data. Oh, my goodness. How can you understand anything from that? Well, you slow it down. You turn it into geometry. You turn it into graphics. You turn it into visuals. Suddenly, you can visualize the ephemeris. Suddenly, you see it's just a clock marking time. And there's the clock, and there's the time going by and the planet moving along. They become the synonymous, and you're relating to when it's relevant in your life. How useful. It's like trying to look at the weather to see if it's raining out when you go out. You know, you look out the window, you read the weather forecast, whatever, and you can prepare for how you're going to go out. So you're just looking at the cycles that are, and once you see them thoroughly, like seeing them, you can see them all at once, you can jump them all together, which is most astrologers do. But until you slow it down and do one at a time, you don't understand the sequence and the implications. You don't have the in-depth thinking or the proper sequential evolution of that person's life. So I've always spent a lot of time working on these things. It's not how it's normally taught. Some people have taught it over the years like this, who inspired me. There was a book, Grant Louis. He wrote Heaven Knows What, and this other book was, one was on the sun-moon combinations, and what the 144 patterns, where the other was on the Saturn cycles. Transits, crises, ages. It was something, I think it was just called Transits. But that's by Grant Louis. He was the editor of Del Horoscope for years. And he has a great story. One day, he never knew his time exactly. He was working on his time for years and years. And one day, he went to go home and his house burnt down. And he's standing outside the house and his house is burning down. And he's jumping up and down and says, I know my time. I know my time. I know. He was able to, because it happened at the exact time, he could see the fire. He knew how to adjust his chart to get his exact time. Funny story, but it's a nice little astrological story. Okay.